Good afternoon. Hello, and welcome to How to Sirtfi Going Beyond the Federation Security Checkbox webinar. If you were looking for today's IAM Online, you are in the right place. This is the monthly webinar series brought to you by Internet2 and InCommon that's focused on identity and access management. We're so glad you were able to join us this afternoon. Once again, this is IAM Online for July. And our topic this afternoon is how to Sirtfi Going Beyond the Federation Security Checkbox. As we get underway, I would like to just make you aware of a couple of items. We are recording today's event. It will be posted, the recording along with the slides at the IAM Online website. And you will also receive the link to the recording and slides via email. So once again, we are recording this afternoon's program, and everyone that has registered for today's webinar will receive an email with the link to both the recording and the slides. We're going to hold our questions until the end of today's presentation, and we will be using the Zoom Q&A function for today's presentation. So we would ask that you use that functionality in posting your questions for today. But you can also feel free to post messages in the chat, but we will primarily be looking to that Zoom Q&A function for our questions this afternoon. And once again, we will be recording today's program. Having said that, without further ado, I'm very happy to turn the virtual podium over to our moderator for this afternoon, David Bantz, who hails from the University of Alaska statewide system and is also chair of the InCommon Community Trust and Assurance Board. Take it away, David.
Thank you, April, and welcome to IAM Online. CTAB, which April mentioned, is the governance group within InCommon that is responsible for baseline expectations, setting guidelines or rules of the road, if you will, to foster greater assurance between participants in the InCommon Federation, all toward the goal of fostering trusted access to resources. Today, we're going to talk about something that is part of the baseline expectations, Sirtfi, or Certify, as it usually gets pronounced, which is a framework for responding to security incidents if they should occur within the InCommon Federation participants. And to do that, we have the leader of the subgroup chartered by CTAB that has conducted tests of use of the Sirtfi framework in a kind of tabletop exercise. Kyle Lewis joined CTAB now a couple of years ago, quickly became a very active contributor to the work of CTAB and increasing trust and assurance, and really fostered the idea of having these tabletop exercises and was the leader of them. Kyle was previously in the U.S. Air Force as a cybersecurity officer, so he comes with a lot of background in security and federation. Kyle's coming to us today from New Jersey, so take it away, Kyle.
There we go. So a little funny thing before we start, I was trying to come up with some graphics to lead this off with, and I was thinking about federation and how I hear the meme a lot. You know, it's InCommon, it's kind of like herding cats. It's the coalition of the willing. And I thought, well, what about cats and cybersecurity? And there were no good graphics open source graphics readily available. So I went to Dolly and pulled up some AI images of cat hacker teams defending the network. And I thought it was very interesting. It came back with a 1980s CGI palette. So it's kind of a little ugly, but also a little appropriate. So I decided to keep it. But we're going to talk about how to certify, and I'm going to say operationalizing certify. So once you're compliant, how do you make it real within your organization? And it involves going beyond the technical. So thank you, David, for that warm welcome. As he mentioned, my name is Kyle Lewis. I'm a member of the InCommon CTAB, and I am the chair of officially what's called the Certified Exercise Planning Working Group, or SEPWG for short. And last year, we ran a cybersecurity cooperation exercise, and that was in order to practice using Sirtfi in a distributed tabletop environment, and it involved 10 in-common member organizations. Some of the feedback called for more training events, opportunities, and more training formats, including a webinar format or presentation format. So this presentation is actually in direct response to some of those participant feedbacks. And so when talking to other in-common members at conferences and various meetings, one of the common themes seems to be that some organizations' connections to in-common are through their IAM team. So maybe at the executive level or the CIO level, that the organization joined in common, but over time, their IAM teams become the major or sole point of contact to the institution. And the IAM teams may or may not be integrated or have close relationships with security teams. Now, granted, that's not going to be true for everyone. My experience is anecdotal to those people that I've talked to, the various tech X's and the 2 iterations of this working group we've had. But it's a theme. It's a theme that's been recurrent enough to take notice as a potential barrier to implementing Sirtfi. And so, as we go forward, I want to think of 2 philosophical goals. How do you plug the IAM team into security, and how do you get the security team injected with more Federation awareness, or what I like to say, Federation mindedness? So this is our agenda. We'll start with the surface. On the surface, like what actually is Sirtfi, and then we'll dive into some practical considerations on how to implement it in such a way that it becomes fully realized in your organization. And we do that because we want the trust goals of the Federation's decision to adopt Sirtfi as part of baseline expectation to also become realized. And we'll wrap up with listing some kinds of situations that might trigger the need for your Sirtfi procedures, and then talk about some of the practices and opportunities we plan and offer to the Federation. So what is it? This is what it stands for: the Security Incident Response Trust Framework for Federated Identity. It's a framework that enables Federation members to coordinate cyber incidents response across that involve more than one Federation member. So it's a means by which your organization publishes an assertion to the Federation in metadata that you're compliant with this framework, and you also publish your security point of contact so people can reach out to you, and it's available for all the Federation to see. So refeds. One administrative note: you'll see throughout this presentation, like at the top here, I have a link to where I'm pulling the source material from. You don't have to worry about trying to copy that down. The very last slide in my presentation has all these links and available for you to screen capture conveniently. But I have them here just so you know I'm sourcing these from someplace. So Refeds publishes a guide for Federation participants on Sirtfi, and I certainly recommend reading it. But in short, to live up to the claims of certified assertion, what you need to do is you have to self-assess and reach yes on all of the 16 what they call normative assertions, and we'll go into those. And you need to publish a security contact that can receive and respond to security notifications or requests for security help from other members in the Certified Trust Framework. You have to agree to use and honor the traffic light protocol. And then finally, you'll at some point you'll log in, or someone on your team will log into the Federation portal, and they'll check the Sirtfi box so that each of your entity's metadata has the Sirtfi compliance assertion. And like I said, each of these components we're going to go through in a little bit more detail. But going through these things and checking this box, is this enough? Well, no. I mean, if it was, we wouldn't be having this presentation, right? So doing all these things sets the stage, but there are some implied tasks that an organization must do in order to live up to the community trust expectations that this framework is designed to support. Trustful questions for self-reflection. So the original versions of these were framed a little bit more pointed, like, can I trust you to do X, Y, and Z? But I decided to turn these on their head to be more of a self-reflective tool that I could use, that each of you could use, in implementing in your organization. So one of the things is, if you reached out to me and you shared a firewall log and you marked it TLP red, can you trust that my team knows that they can't share it with anyone else, including they can't share it with me if you didn't send it to me directly? Or if I have a user account that's compromised and it's been accessing your systems, can you trust that I'm going to reach out to you and let you know we had a compromised account? And if I'm going through a security incident, or you're going through a security incident, you reach out, can you trust that you talking to me is not the first time my team has encountered this framework, or no, has like not the first time that person who's working the incident has encountered the idea of federation. So those are just some kind of questions to frame your mind to help. Like let's dig a little bit deeper than just the compliance of checking the box. And so before we walk through each of the components of Sirtfi, I also want to keep what I'm calling two light towers thoughts in our head. What are the events that activate Sirtfi? By whom? And then remember, there are two activation points. There's internally, what if your security team discovers an incident that's federation-wide, or externally, something comes into your inbox. And then those are kind of like the beginning points where you start to pull out the threads in your processes and your training. Okay, so now we're going to get to the explicit part of the Sirtfi framework, which are the normative assertions. And they're broken into four families. This first one, operational security, it includes things like, does your organization do security patching? Do you do intrusion detection? Do you do vulnerability management? Do you do user rights and access management? And this also includes your own internal organic incident response. Do you have an incident response capability within your organization? And as you go through self-assessing, hopefully you find out these are already done. So hopefully this is not like a barrier to implementing Sirtfi. And these exist on their own. They can pre-exist the desire for Sirtfi in your organization. The incident response family, on the other hand, is specifically about incident response in the federation. So in theory, before you're Sirtfi compliant, none of these exist. None of these exist. And as you become Sirtfi compliant, you have to implement these things. Like I said, these are not about your existing procedures. And so by definition, they can't be yes until you've actually implemented them as you join the framework. But you make sure they're in place so that they become fully realized once you make the assertion. And one note about IR3, I have a red asterisk by it, just in case anyone's curious. Yes, there is a Sirtfi 2 that has been published, and it coexists with Sirtfi 1. At this time, baseline expectations and in common requires Sirtfi 1. So IR3 is a requirement that was explicitly added in Sirtfi 2. I would obviously posit that the desire and the requirement that if you have a security incident that involves another federation member in Sirtfi 1, it's implied that you're going to reach out and notify to them, but that was explicitly added to Sirtfi 2. Okay, and the traceability assertions address the ability to review audit logs and trace recorded network activity. So in other words, it's the ability to investigate an event. And these are crucial in responding to a security incident, including and especially federated security incidents. So if a partner service provider reaches out to you, and let's say you're an identity provider, with evidence that one of your accounts has been compromised, maybe they found some suspicious activity or however they do, and you have to be able to see where else that account has gone, and you have to be able to so that you can notify any other external service providers that account may have accessed. Obviously, you have other security, checklists and obligations beyond that, but again, I'm focusing very much on a federation context here. Let's see next. Okay, so finally, in addition to the others, we have participant responsibilities, and these include like training your users to practice good cyber hygiene. You have to have a basic sense of user awareness. You don't want them to click on links, and they have to be taught that. And so hopefully these are things that exist independent of you going to Sirtfi or not. But if you're asserting Sirtfi and you don't have these things, you need to implement those to make sure that these are true. Okay. So self-evaluation. So the first step of achieving refits certify is to do the self-assessment of everything we just talked about. And but know that there's some nuance here, and there's some guidance from the Refed Certify framework in the yellow highlights, and how thoroughly how thoroughly the capability exists is not specified. So if an organization is having problems, answering yes holistically to one of these things, you focus on the components that interact with federated transactions. And there's also a recognition that any kind of risk mitigation or gap is ultimately up to the risk determination made within each organization. So you take those into account. But the reality is, if you go through any of those questions and you just say, no, we're not doing this, you have to get that to a yes before you can certify. And I consider this part of the framework is very much behind the scenes or behind the curtain to each organization, because in the certified trust framework, there's no external audit, or external check that goes through and grades you on these things. So it is essentially an honor system to make sure you get to yes before you certify. Okay, then we get to the security contact. So this gets back to how integrated are your IAM and security teams? And so if there's a request for certify event and it goes to your security team, they're not familiar with Federation, how well is it going to be handled? And I think there might be an unconscious assumption on some people's parts that you have to put your organizational security team as your security contact. But getting back to the Refed's wiki, and again, this link will be included in the last slide, they have published a kind of a decision chart to help guide you through what or who should you be publishing and sharing as a security contact. And again, the idea here is the people answering the phone, so to speak, need to understand what certify is. They need to know how to honor traffic light protocol, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I do want to caveat this thing, and we'll talk about this as we go forward. Even if you don't make your main security team your security contact, you still have to make sure that your security team understands certify and you get that federation mindedness injected into their procedures. Because if they detect something and investigate something, they have to think about that dimension. Otherwise, it's going to be missed. Okay, and so the third part is the traffic light protocol. Provides a way, basically, if you're going to share some sensitive information, maybe it's a network log, a firewall log, that you're cooperating with the other organization's investigation team, but it's sensitive. It's a way for you to indicate what your expectations are on them and how far, if at all, they can share what you provided them. And this may include an account, the identity of an account that was compromised, like the username, or all the way up to sharing audit logs. So this slide here shows kind of like the thumbnail versions of the definitions. There's a little bit more detail and caveats and nuances like TLP clear, TLP wipe. Its disclosure is not limited, but of course that has nothing to do with copyright law. So you can't, if there's copyrighted material, that's actually specified in the TLP definitions if you go to cisa.gov. But I expect in these kinds of scenarios, the default will be, unless, exceptions notwithstanding, TLP Amber is probably going to be the norm when you're working through a cybersecurity scenario. And so this gets also back to, we talked about who's answering the phone, who's your security team. Are they trained on the traffic light protocol? And so the reason I foot stomp this, I think in a trust federation, ensuring that your own teams know how to honor this, it's as or more important than knowing how to mark your own information. Because vice versa, if you mark it, you want to be confident that the partner organizations are honoring your wishes. They understand what your wishes are. Okay, so to make certify real within your organization, it's almost certainly going to require an evolution of your culture and your processes. To build federation mindedness, your main securities team's procedures need to incorporate a Federation response, and they need to practice it, at least as an internal exercise or an internal training. My preferred method is tabletop exercise, but there is more than one way to achieve training. So your IAM team needs to realize that they are part of your organization's security framework, if they don't already. And again, I know there are a lot of organizations that do have this, but it's good to stop and think about that. And if there is not a strong institutional relationship between your security team and your IAM team, I would posit that your IAM team, since this is probably the biggest audience, that most of the audience here are IAM teams, need to reach out and establish a routine and recurring touch point, because you're probably going to have to help them update their procedures. So getting back to the light towers. I alluded to these earlier on, and now that we've talked about certified components, these points should be more crystallized signposts on where you need to start and what you need to do, documenting your procedures and training on them. So, what activates Sirtfi? So where does the process kick off? There's two kind of discovery points. It's either internal or external. Who's responsible for it, and are they trained? So are all these considerations documented? So this is what we did on the, so one of my other jobs is I work for the NIAD International Biomedical Support Team. And so way back when InCommon was about to make it part of baseline expectations, my boss, who some of you know, Chris Whalen, came to me and my colleague, and it's like, hey, we have to be certified compliant. What does that mean, and what does it take? And so on the technical side, it was just a matter of where do we publish the metadata? Who do we want our security contact to be? We did some things behind the scenes. We created a security email that generates into our ticketing system and made sure that the ticket was high priority and we were all notified. But beyond that, we wrote a standing operating procedure on Sirtfi, which includes all the Sirtfi components. It includes internal requirements like, okay, we got this request. How do we make sure it's legitimate? Before we share any information, even though, organizationally, we're going to help and cooperate because we're part of the framework, we probably want to notify our leadership. Our CIO is probably going to and our CISO will probably want to know pretty quickly if there's a potential security incident that's affecting us, or that we might be affecting someone else. So we have some internal things we had to consider. We wrote down the guidance on the TLPs. So, and we put all of this into our internal information management library. So as part of our larger body of IT support and security documentation. So it was seamlessly integrated. And then of course, we created a training session. So there's a slide deck on speaking notes that went along with the introduction of the SOP. And then we already had an annual requirement to practice our security incident response plan, because NIAD obviously is a US government client, and the government has these, through NIST, it has these requirements to have response plans and practice it once a year. And so we went through those checklists and we started adding triggering questions. So every single time there's a security incident, we systematically go through each point in the checklist. We don't rush it, and we get to the question that says, does this involve a federated account? Or is this one of our accounts that's linked to our IDP so it has federated access? And if the answer to that is yes, it directs us to open up the SOP. And then we incorporated that into our internal tabletop exercises. And then we added training on the Refed's metadata extraction tool, metadata explorer tool, which I'll show here in the future slide. On how to look up security context. So this gets back to, are your people trained on what they need to do? Most of Sirtfi is a process and procedure thing, but there are a couple actions they need to know how to do, like if they get the entity ID, how do they go find that security contact? And then we also included quizzes on TLP markings. So if you feel like you have to start from scratch, you don't have to start from scratch. And so I don't intend to go into all of these points here. These are screenshots, but I wanted to show you that this is available. Edugain has a security incident response handbook, and On the Sirtfi wiki, it has a section for Federation. It links to this, and it has a section for Federation participants. So these are things you can use to incorporate in your own documentation. So that's one resource. We also have on the Sirtfi wiki a bunch of templated emails. So incident response templates. These aren't mandatory, but these are available for you to use as a starting point to supplement your local procedures. And we share these templates with all the teams that decide to play in our annual tabletop exercise that we host for InCommon. And then finally, this is the MET tool, the metadata extraction tool. And so this is a tool where you can put an entity ID and it returns the Federation metadata, including the published contacts. And we demo this for all our exercise participants as part of the exercise training. And we design the exercise so that all the players actually use this because they start passing, they have to find that security contact to be able to pass messages to each other. And so your security response training needs to incorporate this tool. And also, we talked earlier about the traceability controls, the ability to look in your audit logs. Those are important because that's where you're going to find the seeds to this. You're going to find those entity IDs that you plug into this tool that then gives you the email address for the security contact. And then finally, the Refed's Incident Response Handbook also talks about working with your Federation operators. So there's another number of Federation operator responsibilities. And in InCommon, there is a published security incident response context. So I kind of showed you the InCommon website here. And you go to help, and then you go to security incident response, and it takes you to this other page, and there's a email address with a PGP key. If you support PGP, you can send secure notes, or there's a voicemail. And then you can use that to notify them when there's an incident that affects the Federation. And this is important because they might help you. Let's say InCommon's part of a Federation's EduGain, right? And so maybe the incident spills over into an international partner that's not part of InCommon. And the Federation operators can help make those linkages with the EduGain. Okay, and then obviously when you're thinking about security incidents, what kinds of things might trigger the need for the certified procedure? And these are ideas you could use in your own internal exercises. Obviously, if something gets compromised, a server gets compromised to be a spam server and it starts using an address, it could be that email address could be coming from an account that's also, has federated access. The big one, of course, is a user account is you discover someone's been phished. That's probably one of the biggest risks to a network is the social engineering. There might be instances where there's a hacktivist group out after account credentials because they want to go scrape some research libraries that have research papers that aren't necessarily open to the public without being a member when they publish it on an underground server. Nation state actors are always a factor. Research and education, everyone's interested in getting competitive edge. And at least in the NIH and the NIAID world during COVID, it hit the news, if you guys didn't see it, but there were definitely nation state actors, China, Russia, trying to get at COVID research. So insider threat, I'm not going to read all of these, but insider threat is always an issue. Or maybe you have a user come to your help desk and say, hey, I had an identity monitoring service. They told me my credentials were found on the web and it happens to be my institutional credentials. But the bottom line here is, it doesn't matter how this starts. Anytime you have an indicator of a compromised account, your security team needs to ask, does this account access the Federation? And then the next question is, during that time frame that we think this account was compromised, did this account access an external SP in the Federation? And that's when we're, in my view, we're obligated to then exercise our certified procedures because we're all trusting each other to do the same. So these are some recommended areas to include in your own internal documentation or standard operating procedures. And the highlighted yellow items are things that you can practice in an internal tabletop exercise. And these also happen to be the training goals of the in common, what I call the cybersecurity cooperation exercises. And we did the first one last year. And these tasks include looking up security context, how to respond to requests for help. And like I said, we have some internal things we had to practice. I have a request for help. I'm not just going to respond. I need to notify leadership, and there's some notifications we have to make internally before we move forward on that. And of course, knowledge of the TLP levels. For the bottom bullet point, though, it's important to add certified questions to all response actions for compromised accounts. Security teams need to be prompted to ask if the account has access to other service providers. And I know I've been saying that over and over again, but I also believe, repetition helps things sink in. So to review the practical points, do your self-assessments, update your security checklists, train your teams on certified responsibilities and actions, train on the traffic light protocol, and train on how to find a security point of contact. And then it's important to practice. And speaking of practice, last year we sponsored our first cybersecurity cooperation exercise. We had 10 organizations participate in a distributed week-long scenario. And what did that consist of? Well, our planning group focused on specific objectives to prompt process and procedures. It was not a technical exercise. There was no real-world network activity or clues being buried in a real audit log that someone had to go find. It's fairly straightforward, but each participating organization, they got to practice responding to and notifying other playing organizations. And each organization had an opportunity to review their own holistic internal security procedures. And they used the opportunity to train and develop their teams. Each organization learned how to look up security metadata, something that we found that without training, folks assumed it would just be easy to do, but people didn't necessarily know how to do it. The answer is it is easy to do if you know how to do it. But if you don't know how to do it, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And you can lose time trying to figure that out. And in this exercise last year in 2022, the feedback from the participants was consistently a desire to do more such events and to expand on the training opportunities. And so if you weren't there that last year, this is how it looked like. So I said it was a week long. Really, it was an orientation on Monday for the players, 3 days worth of script, and then a wrap up, lessons learned. We all came back together and talked about the event. And the impact on each organization was, a few hours on a given day. It wasn't, each organization was playing, through all 3 days. So what are we doing this year in our working group? So it's, it's obviously this webinar on what are those extra process and procedure things we need to consider before we can say, yeah, we're living up to the trust expectations of Sirtfi and our friends in the Federation. There is an open survey to the community. It's still open. This link is, again, included in the final slide, but it asks things like, of Sirtfi, like what areas would you like to focus on? And then it also asks things of, how would your organization like to learn? Like, is it the exercise? Is it a seminar? Is it a one-day combined table talk? Like we could do something in a Zoom room all at once with everyone where we talk through things. All of those are possibilities. What we have done is we've evolved the narrative script. And what we're doing for practice this year is a fictional, internal to our own team. We're going to practice like how to run an exercise on 1 August. And that's something just for our working group. And that gets us ready for the November exercise. But that script that we developed to practice internally will be something that we'll be able to pass on next year. That if, there could be a 1 or 2, probably 2 or 3 hour session, maybe at a conference or a Zoom, combined Zoom call where we did like an in-person cooperative tabletop. And for this year's November exercise, the call for participation will go out likely mid to late August. It will be open through the end of December. Open through the end of September. So I want to keep that open until after TechX. But the targeted dates for that week-long exercise this year is November 13th or 17th, which is the last full week before the Thanksgiving week. And just to show you an example of the narrative richness, last year we didn't need to storyboard the script. So this is actually the storyboard we're using internally for our practice on 1 August with our working group to learn how to do this. And we used this approach to kind of draw out the script. We wanted to come up with a scenario where there were two separate hacker organizations with two different agendas, but because of federation, the response gets a little bifurcated. And we color coded it, so we had a blue scenario and a purple scenario, and then we put, and these are fictional organizations, but when we put our plan for November, it'll be the organizations that want to participate, and we can color code it and see, okay, where's the distribution of activity with each of the playing organizations. So for us, this is a learning experience, but I think every year we do this, we're going to have a group of people on the planning committee, and then we're going to spend some time forming as a group to learn how to do this. And that's also another benefit to being on the SCP. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but next year we'll do this again. Great to have some volunteers. And I think that's another benefit is anyone who's on this team will be able to take some of these methods on how do you build a scenario and how do you practice and bring it back to your own organizations. And so these are the conclusions and the takeaways. So it's everything I just talked about. But think about your procedures and your checklist behind the scenes and not, what does it mean when you're saying, I'm going to do this? How do you make sure you're actually going to do this? And that comes to procedure, process, training. And then please look for the call for participation that's going to go out with the exercise this year. And if you're interested, consider volunteering for next year's SCPWG. If you come to TechX this year in September, I will be there. I'm happy to talk about any of this in more detail. And this is my final slide. So available for you to snapshot and capture to your heart's content. And at that point, I think I am finished and ready to turn over back to David and April.
Thank you, Kyle. That was a very broad and simultaneously in-depth exploration of the exercise and why we want to repeat that exercise and make sure we're able to respond and clear incidents. I believe we're open for questions for Kyle. Anyone of the attendees? I think you can either raise your hand in chat or type a message in the chat. Raise your hand in the attendees list. Kyle, you mentioned, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to help. This is April. We actually do have a question that came in through the Zoom Q&A. This is from Aaron Scanlon. How are trust violations reported and handled?
So I'm going to turn it over to David, but I think I'm going to parrot the question so I make sure we're understanding it. I think what you're asking, for example, is, what happens if someone does not honor your TLP marking? What happens if someone does not live up to what they say the assertions are be? And so to me, there's nothing in Sirtfi that directly addresses that. However, it being part of baseline expectations within Common has an additional factor for consideration. At that, I think I might turn over to David.
So one of the responsibilities of CTAB, the Community Trust and Assurance Board, is to play a role when there's a conflict or a dispute among participants. So if there is a participant that appears not to be appropriately responding and clearing a security incident, that could result in the other participants saying, wait a minute, we've got a problem. We need to have this other participant either step up and respond or in some way, ultimately have them perhaps removed from the federation, which would be the final step of an entire process. So to facilitate that potential of a conflict and a way to resolve it, there is an elaborate process called the dispute resolution process, which focuses, first of all, in trying to get enough communication going so that people will in fact address the issue. And only as a last result, suggest some kind of punitive action like removing an entity from the in-common federation, which would go through an entire checklist of community consensus and consultation and inability of the participant to respond. We have not had anything go through that full process in the several years that it's been in place. Well, that's a good thing. We have had entities that were unable or unwilling or did not respond to some of the other baseline expectations. And a small number of them were in the end cooperatively removed from the In-Common Federation. Those entities aren't there. So there is some teeth for expectations. Kyle, you mentioned a couple of times in the presentation, retrieving security contact metadata from the refeds tool. I think you have the ability to actually demo that live. You might want, if you'd like to.
Yeah, we can do that. Let's see. Make sure I get my right page up. Of course, I had that page loaded just in case. Go back to sharing my screen. So this is the live page. I'm going to take our entity ID that you would. So if you were, if we were told one of our accounts were compromised, or actually if you're a service provider and you suspect our account was compromised, or was doing something weird, and you look in your shibboleth logs, or whatever tool you're using, you would find the entity ID. And one of the keys here, so you have this metadata explorer tool, and it's hosted by Edugame. So it's a federation of federations. It includes In-Common and others, everyone in Edugame. And you do not have to click this login link up here, access through your institution. I know some people got caught up on clicking on that, and for whatever reason, they couldn't get in, so they thought the site was broken. The site's not broken. You don't have to log in. You just go into the service ID. You put in that entity ID that you would get from your logs, and it pulls, see, this is our IDP. It pulls it right up. It shows what federations they're in. And then to get the security contact, all you need to do is then click on the name that comes up, pulls up all the metadata. And on this tool, it's not marked security, it's marked other. So under contacts at the very bottom, it's marked other. And if I highlight over that, you'll see there's a mail to global security at NIH.gov, and that's my security contact. You can also find, like if for whatever reason you want to go out and find something, maybe you don't have an entity ID, but let's look at this. Let's look at Molly. You can actually search on, and names too. So this is everything that comes up with Molly. I know I serve Molly, but if you are looking for Somali ran event management system, you could find something that way, and you could do the same thing. You click on, so they're in common. Let's see if they have. So it does not look like this entity ID has a security contact denoted.
But the certify requirement is a requirement for In-Common members, not necessarily for other federations.
Right. Right, that's a good point. So it's not a hard tool to use. The challenge is if you don't have internet access, it's hard to get to it. It's one of those things that once you see it, it's easy. But if you don't know about it and you don't know how to look it up, or you get stuck on clicking on this login thing and it may not work for whatever reason, it hampers you up. But all you got to do is put in the entry guide here and you pull up the security contact.
So we have another question in the Q&A asking whether there are any monetary resources available, grants or other forms for training with Sirtfi.
That
your alley. I don't know if anyone else would be welcome to contribute if you know of such a source.
Yeah, that's beyond my scope of awareness. So that's why I'm trying to offer or help participate and facilitate things that are openly available.
This is April again, and Kyle, I did put in chat, if you want, I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little more about the survey that you all have going, because I think one of the goals there was to find out what kinds of training people were interested in, so that we have that sense, whether or not that's training that we're able to provide in the future.
Right. So the survey has a series of questions such as, is this least important, most important? So you get to grade your interest level. It asks things like, what's going to be most beneficial to your organization? Lectures, a blog post, an in-person exercise, or virtual Zoom call where it's all at once. Training materials, the distributed exercise, the tabletop that we're building, and then it also asks things like, where do you need the most focus? Is it TLP? Is it what kinds of scenarios would trigger certify? Is it help on the normative assertions? Those kinds of things. And this link takes you to a Google form. It does, from my understanding, require a Google account to access. I have explicitly set it that it does not record your email address. So if all you have is a personal Google Gmail account, you could still get into it, fill it out for your organization. It's not going to give us your personal email account. It asks you to enter in one of the fields, what is your point of contact email?
So Kyle, I don't know if you are far enough along in the process yet, but I wonder if there are particular kinds, either expertise or interests among participants that you're looking for, or a type of institution or organization to participate in the next exercise. Is your opportunity to recruit?
So we don't have, to me, a breadth is more important than targeting specific things. We want a mix, obviously a mix of service providers and identity providers. A balanced mix would be ideal, but we'll work with whatever we can get. It would be nice to have a representation from big universities, community colleges, government. To me, diversity is the key there. But I can't think of what we will be asking this year, which we didn't really last year, is for service providers, a little bit of information on what service is this, what does this do? Because we're going to try to tailor the script a little bit to what your service actually provides. I'm hoping, well, I don't want to give away too much, but I'm hoping we get a library, one of the service providers is maybe a technical library that hosts research papers. But obviously databases, any kind of research database makes the script easier. But I would also say, just participate. If all we get are IDPs, we'll figure something out. I'll role play a service provider if I have to. But I don't think that's really a danger. We got a good healthy mix last year. We had actually, it ended up being equal distributions. We had in each playing team, we had 6 service provider entities and 3 and 3 IDPs that we were able to weave together. There's a question here. Would sharing the full NIAD SOP and letting folks review it help orgs determine what resources they might already have and might need to procure?
You can elaborate. You can speak if you want to elaborate on that, Aaron.
It really just kind of looked like the pillow, by the way, excellent talk. It really just kind of looked like the AID one was kind of like a high level sort of discussion of, the SOP that was generated with them. I'm wondering, obviously, some parts of that SOP might need to be, retconned or whatever to protect organizational context. But, I liked the example of, an organization saying, well, how do I even get started with this? And I feel like if, I think that high level outline was solid, but I was just thinking what other things could be offered to organizations that are really, kind of starting from square zero, or at least think they're starting from square zero, right? I think it's very important to consider whether or not an organization might already have some of the tools and resources that they need to get going with this, but might just need help recognizing that.
Right. I probably wouldn't share like this straight SOP as we've written it. But it's going to be easy to tailor. I've written these slides in a very outline and checklist format for a reason, so that anyone, and including our own working group, maybe that's work after we get past this next exercise for next year, to take that and turn it into an implementation handbook. Go through a checklist of these are the things you need to address. Here's an example procedure, but it's hard to write a single procedure for every organization because your organization is not going to look like mine and vice versa. I'm on a team that's much more homogenous in that our international team has. In fact, I meant to caveat that as I said, we did all this training. We are separate from the NIAD main security team. And the NIAD main security team and its certified responsibilities actually falls under NIH. It's a weird scenario. So we have our own security front door, and our team has IAM, all these system administration and security on one team, attending the same daily stand-ups every day and all involved. So our disciplines are tightly integrated from that standpoint. And I know some universities, it's like, yeah, it's one quote unquote organization, but it's really a campus of campuses, and there's maybe even a lot of different CIOs, and it's much more non-homogeneous environment. And I don't like this one person here doesn't necessarily have the answer to solve all that, because I don't know what the organizations are, but that's where having more representation on these SEPWGs, like I would love to see this offered every year and to get better and better every year. And the more diversity and breadth of experience and kinds of organizations that are represented in these training scenarios will just add richness and value every year. And I think coming up with just like EduGain had those email templates to start with. Like, if you don't know how to reach out to someone, here's something you can tailor. Here's some procedures you can tailor. And I can share like our incident response checklist. It's pretty high level. It's not like go press this button and pull this lever, and deploy the script. It's do you have the right people in the room? And during the investigation phase, there's a specific question you have to answer: is this in response to a request for help? Is this coming from outside from the Federation? Or is this account that we're worried about? Because not all of our accounts are federated accounts, even on the international team. But is this account attached to IDP? And then it's like, oh, it is. We have to go down this branch now.
That'll definitely make sense. Thank you very much for that.
No, thanks for the questions. Appreciate it.
So Kyle, when you were discussing the traffic light protocol, you emphasized, of course, if something has got a red, you're not going to be able to share that. But the same list of requirements also mentioned notifying the contacts of other entities that might be implicated in a security incident. Talk a little bit more about how those two requirements
Right. So if you encounter a collision, I like to call that a bureaucratic collision. All of the TLPs have exceptions and caveats. You can always go back and ask for, okay, I can't do anything with this unless you allow me to share X, Y, and Z. And I would imagine, from my perspective, there's not much that I would want to mark TLP red. The only time on my team that I would recommend working a TLP red would be something that would have CNN level implications. And the example I like to use in training, as you know, our director until very recently was Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Fauci was obviously in the news very often. So if we had an incident where we had a compromised user account, I might mark TLP amber all the network stuff that we're trying to solve the account with. But if it comes out whose account it was, I might just pick up the phone and say, hey, TLP red, this is why I'm not telling you and sending you in the email whose it was about. Because if that got out to the news, that would just go pop. So for us, those are the kinds of sensitivities we might consider. If someone were to come to my team and said, okay, I'm going to send you a firewall log and I'm marking it TLP red, the first thing I'm going to tell that person is well, I'm not my firewall, I'm not my technical expert, so I'm not going to be able to do anything with this. You're going to have to let me share it or get someone else in the room, right? And TLP red, if you read the CISA guidance, it says it's mostly intended for phone conversations. It's one of those things like if you tell me TLP red, I can't even tell my boss what you told me. Might be able to tell my boss you told me something and we got to do something, but I can't give the details. And so to me, TLP red is not very useful in solving the scenario, hopefully. So there has to be that conversation back and forth of what do I need to help you? And I need you to listen this up to Amber if you want me to be able to help you, kind of thing. I think there's always going to be like that human interaction that has to negotiate those collisions.
Right. Well, it's 5 minutes before the hour. I have a practice when I chair our CTAB meetings of trying to end a few minutes before the top of the hour to give people a break before their next on-site or online meeting. So pause just for a second. If there's any last question or comment for the good of the order. April, do you have a closing remark for IAM Online?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, David. And many thanks to both you and Kyle for a great presentation and discussion this afternoon. And to everybody who attended, whether you posted questions or just listened in, we very much appreciate you being with us this afternoon. And special thanks to Courtney and the Internet 2 Meetings team who make IAM Online possible every month. Before we sign off, I do want to let you know that, again, we did record this event, so that recording will be available to you. There is a quick 4-question survey that you'll get as you're exiting Zoom. We'd ask that you complete that. We appreciate your feedback about IAM Online. Also want to let you know we are taking August off, so we will be back in September with another great webinar for you. Once again, thank you for being here. We'll see you in September. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye all.